She thought she was just saving a Mustang from a cruel, illegal auction. But the moment their eyes met, something changed. What happened next will stay with you forever. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about fate, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and a wild horse that nobody wanted. The auction yard didn't smell like hope. It smelled like rusted metal, cigarette smoke, and fear. The horses moved in tight circles inside makeshift pens, some pacing, others still as statues. Their hooves clicked on concrete as loudspeakers, barked out numbers, weights, and prices like livestock at a meat market. Clara Whitmore, 34, walked through the crowd with her head low, a faded baseball cap pulled over her auburn curls. She wasn't there to buy, not really. She was there to save one. But she didn't know which one until she saw him. He was in the farthest pen, where the shadows lingered and the buyers rarely walked. A young Mustang stallion, lean but strong. His coat was streaked with dust and old sweat, his color a rare dark copper, almost bronze in the fading light. A thick, wild black mane fell over one eye. And what stunned Clara was the stillness all around him. Horses kicked, bit, and panicked, but he stood perfectly still, watching her. His eyes, deep golden brown, steady and knowing, locked onto hers like he'd been waiting. Clara's breath hitched. Something in her chest said, "It's him. These are wild stock." The auctioneer grunted as she approached. Came in from Arizona, branded for slaughter. Clara's heart sank. No tag, no freeze mark. Probably dumped. No ID means no delay. He smirked. "You want him?" She nodded slowly. "How much?" He looked her up and down. "You're new to this." Clara kept her voice firm. "How much?" 500. Cash only, no papers, no questions. Her hand went to the envelope in her coat pocket. Just over $700 saved from cleaning stalls and part-time vet tech work. Without a word, she handed it over. The man gave her a receipt scribbled on scrap paper. "You'd better load fast. Buyers don't like it when someone pulls a kill horse." Clara returned with a halter, heart pounding. When she opened the gate to the pen, other horses backed away in panic, but not him. The Mustang didn't move. He waited. She moved slowly, one breath at a time, until she was inches away, up close. She saw the scars, faint ones around the legs and the chest, and the halter marks that never faded. "You've seen too much," she whispered. She raised the halter, and for one impossible moment, he dipped his head and let her slide it over. No fight, no flinch, just trust. Clara choked back tears. "What's your name?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The Mustang blinked slowly. "I'm going to call you Solace," she said, "because that's what you just gave me." The drive back to her ranch was long and silent. She stopped once for gas, keeping the trailer door open just enough to check on him. Solace hadn't moved. He stood calmly in the trailer like he'd been waiting for this his whole life. Back at the ranch, she led him into the empty quarantine paddock. He stepped out with grace, head high, taking in the open land like he'd stepped into another world. Clara stood by the gate, unable to look away. She'd rescued horses before, dozens, but none like this. Solace turned and looked at her again, and in that second, something passed between them. Not gratitude, not fear, but something deeper. Like he'd been searching and finally found what he was looking for. The first night, Solace didn't lie down. Clara stayed up late watching him from the kitchen window, a cup of tea turning cold in her hands. He stood at the far end of the paddock, unmoving, as if guarding something invisible. His presence was unsettling in the most beautiful way, still, silent, ancient. She had seen wild horses panic, scream, and throw themselves against fences. Solace did none of that. He simply watched, not the trees, not the stars, but her. The next morning, Clara woke before the sun. She slipped into her old work coat, pulled her boots on, and stepped into the chill. The ranch was quiet, just the soft sound of wind rushing through the frost-covered pines. Solace stood in the same place she'd left him, but something was different. As she approached, he shifted slightly and took one step toward her. No panic, no resistance, just a silent acknowledgement. She spoke softly as she entered the paddock, not wanting to spook him. "Morning, Solace. Let's get a better look at you, huh?" She moved slowly, always to the side, never directly in front of him. She let her hand graze his shoulder, then his neck. His muscles didn't flinch. She stepped closer, and that's when she saw it, not a scar, not a wound, but something carved deep into the skin beneath layers of dust and hair, a faint brand. It was hard to make out, but it was there, faded like it had been burned long ago and never properly documented. Clara's heart jumped. What the? She knelt to get a better look, brushing gently at the coat near his left flank. And there it was, USGVBLM, a wild Mustang, one of theirs, but why wasn't it reported? These horses were microchipped, documented, and protected. Salas should have been traceable and should have never ended up in a kill pen, unless someone had wanted him to disappear. Back inside the house, Clara pulled up her laptop and logged into the BLM Mustang registry. She typed in a basic description: dark copper coat, black mane, faint flank brand. Hundreds of results. She added location, Arizona, year estimate, 5 to 7 years old. The list narrowed. Then her heart stopped. One record, no photo, status deceased. Name, A4G0713. Capture location, Tono Basin, age at capture, 2. Foster status, failed. Disposition, aggressive, dangerous, labeled for disposal. Disposal confirmed, transported to the processing facility, and euthanized. Record closed. Clara leaned back, shocked. He's supposed to be dead. That night, she returned to the paddock, flashlight in hand. Salas stepped forward as she entered. Calmly lowering his head near her shoulder, she touched the faint brand. Again, tracing it like it was some lost truth. You weren't aggressive, she whispered. You were scared, and they gave up on you. She reached for his halter and sat down in the grass beside him. He didn't move. In the silence, the stars above glowed brightly. The ranch felt suspended in time. Clara spoke softly. They marked you as unworthy, but they were wrong. Her throat tightened. Because you're here now, and I don't care what their records say. You were never broken. Salas exhaled through his nostrils and lowered his muzzle. To her knee, Clara froze. He rested there, soft and steady. His weight wasn't heavy. It was grounding, like he needed her just as much as she needed him. That night, she updated the notebook she kept for every rescue. But for Salas, she didn't write case notes. She wrote, they tried to erase him. But something stronger pulled him back. This horse didn't survive. He returned. The next morning, Clara drove straight into town with a mission. She couldn't shake what she had read the night before. A federal record saying Salas was dead. Yet he was alive, breathing, standing in her paddock, and showing more gentleness than half the horses she'd ever trained. She parked outside the dusty office of a local wildlife and livestock inspector named Marlon Finch, a retired rancher in his 60s who still worked part-time with animal control and livestock identification. He'd helped her before, and she knew if anyone could dig deeper into BLM records, it was him. Inside the office, stacks of folders, maps, and auction flyers covered every surface. Marlon sat behind a desk, hat pushed back, glasses hanging from his neck. Clara held out a printout. I need your help. He squinted. Is this a Mustang record? Clara nodded. This horse is alive in my paddock, but the system says he was euthanized 3 years ago. He looked again, eyebrows rising. A4G0713. That's one of the Tonta groups. Nasty roundup that year, lots of misreports. She leaned forward. He's not aggressive. He lets me touch him. He's different. Marlon scratched his chin, then slowly stood. All right, let's pull the archive files. They worked for nearly 2 hours in the back room of the records building, sifting through crates labeled with dusty tags and binder clips. When Marlon finally pulled the folder, it was thin to thin. He flipped it open, then frowned. That's strange. No final scan, no transport logs. I just confirmed euthanasia at the outpost facility. No date stamp, no receiving signature. Clara stiffened. So there's no proof. He was euthanized. Not really, Marlon said slowly. And this part, he tapped. The corner, this name. Private contractor, that's not usual. Who? He adjusted his glasses. Sloan Transport, independent operator. Got dropped from the list a couple of years ago. Clara's stomach dropped. That name sounded familiar, very familiar. Then she remembered the same Sloan name she had seen scribbled on the receipt from the illegal auction yard. Back at the ranch, the air felt heavier than usual. Salas stood near the gate as Clara returned. She opened the latch slowly, her hands shaking not from fear but from realization. She walked into the paddock, and he stepped toward her. This time, she didn't stop moving. She walked right up to him and raised both hands to his face. Salas didn't flinch. Did they sell you off? She whispered. Marked you as dead and sent you away like garbage. His eyes blinked slowly. Then he lowered his head again, resting his forehead against her chest. It was the second time he'd done that. And this time Clara cried not because of what she'd discovered, but because he wasn't asking for sympathy. He was simply being there for her. That evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at the photo she'd taken of the brand. She opened her laptop and typed into a private HorseRescue group forum. Has anyone ever had a case where a Mustang listed as euthanized turned up alive at an illegal auction? The responses flooded in, some skeptical, some angry, but one message stood out. It was from a woman named Jess Loretto, a former BLM facility worker. I've seen this more than once. If it's the contractor I think it is, you need to be careful. These horses weren't just sold, they disappeared. Clara's fingers froze over the keyboard. Disappeared. She turned her head toward the window. Outside, Salas stood in the fading light. The wind picked up, brushing against his black mane as he raised his head and looked at her like he knew she was finally seeing the whole truth. The wind picked up that night. A storm was brewing in the hills, and Clara could feel it not just in the clouds but in her chest. Ever since she got that message from Jess Loretto, her instincts hadn't calmed. She knew how things worked in this world. Paper trails could disappear, animals could vanish, and people who asked the wrong questions could vanish too. But she couldn't walk away now, not after what they did to Salas, not after the way he looked at her like she was the first real truth he'd seen in years. She spent the next morning in her barn office, sifting through every file she had, every photo, every bill of sale. She took detailed pictures of Salas's faint brand and scanned them into her laptop, along with the auction receipt that bore one critical scribble at the top, Sloan. She cross-referenced every connection she could find between Sloan transport and illegal livestock trades. The deeper she dug, the more her stomach twisted. There were rumors and complaints, but no arrests, no public exposure, just whispers that certain horses, ones labeled aggressive or dangerous, disappeared off the BLM books, never to be seen again. Except now, one of them had come back. Clara was out feeding the other horses when she heard it, the gravel crunch of tires on her front drive. She looked up, a black truck with no plates. Her heart slammed. Salas, in the nearby paddock, raised his head and stared too, ears forward, muscles tense. The truck stopped just outside the gate. A man stepped out, mid-50s, tan jacket, sunglasses. Despite the overcast sky, she didn't recognize him, but his energy was wrong to casual, to confident. He didn't walk to the house. He walked to the fence, straight towards Salas. Clara moved quickly, cutting across the yard. Can I help you? The man turned slowly with a cool smile. Nice horse. He's not for sale. I didn't ask. His voice was smooth to smooth. She stepped closer, her hand instinctively sliding toward her phone in her coat pocket. Who are you? He ignored her, eyes still on Salas. You know, horses like him, they don't usually last long. Too much fire, too many problems. Can't be broken. He's not broken, Clara snapped, and he's not yours. The man looked at her then, long and slow. Be careful what you dig into, miss. And with that, he turned, walked back to the truck, and drove off. No dust trail, no tire squeal, just gone. Clara stood frozen for a full minute. Then she turned to Salas. He hadn't moved, but his breathing was fast, eyes wide. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon long after the truck disappeared. He knew you, she whispered. Or worse, he remembered. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She pulled a blanket over her shoulders and went to the paddock with a lantern in hand. Salas stood near the gate, waiting for her like he always did. She opened the latch and stepped inside. He came to her immediately, and for the first time since she'd brought him home, He leaned into her fully shoulder to chest. Wait. And all? Clara closed her eyes. He came here looking for you, she said. But I won't let him take you again. Salas shifted slightly, and something strange happened. His head jerked toward the trees. Ears stiff, alert. Clara spun. In the distance, between the tree line and the barn, something moved, a shadow. Then gone. She swallowed hard and whispered. Into the dark. Not tonight. At dawn. The frost still clung to the paddock fence rails like delicate lace. Clara hadn't slept. Not really. She kept her boots by the door and the lantern burning low in the window. She wasn't being paranoid anymore. She was being hunted. Salas had barely moved since the shadow passed through the trees. He stood at the eastern end of the paddock, unmoving, eyes scanning the horizon as if he, too, was on guard. Clara stepped outside, coffee in hand, jacket zipped to her chin. Her eyes immediately locked on him. He hadn't lain down all night. Same here, she muttered. She walked to the paddock gate slowly. As soon as she unlatched it, Salas turned, not just turned, but walked to her, confident, calm. Then he stopped, not beside her, but in front of her, blocking her view between her and the open field. Her breath caught. You're protecting me, she whispered. Salas didn't move, not a flick of the ear, not a stomp, only his chest rising and falling, slow and steady. Clara looked past him into the trees. They were empty now, but she knew he'd seen it first. Later that morning, she led him into the round pen for the first time. No halter, no lead rope, just her voice. Let's see what they tried to erase. Salas followed her in and stopped exactly where she pointed. No resistance, no hesitation. She moved to the center, and he circled once. No whip, no command, just instinct. Then he stopped, faced her, ears forward, and then he bowed, one knee bent, head low, tail still. A trained bow. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Where did you learn that? She breathed. He rose slowly and did something else. He walked toward her, stopped, turned, and backed up until his body was at her side, perfectly aligned, positioned like a trained therapy horse. She reached out, handshaking, and touched his neck, still warm, still real. You were trained, she whispered. You were someone's. You meant something. Salas tilted his head toward her and gave a soft exhale. Clara's throat tightened. You were never broken, she said. They just couldn't understand you. That afternoon, she called Jess Laredo. The woman answered after 3 rings, her voice sharp but breathless. Are you okay? I think I just confirmed what you said, Clara replied. She explained what she saw, how Salas responded to cues, and how he behaved like a therapy-trained Mustang. Jess was quiet for a long time. Then finally, that group, they didn't want horses who connected. They wanted horses who obeyed, silent, obedient, invisible. And if they weren't, they disappeared. Clara stared out at the field where Salas now stood beneath a tree. They didn't break him, she said softly. They made him stronger. Jess's voice dropped to a whisper. That horse came back for a reason. That night, thunder rolled in the distance. Clara turned off all the lights except one lantern by the window. She left the front door unlocked and sat on the couch, a shotgun resting by her feet, not because she wanted to fight, but because she knew one was coming. At 1:20 a.m., a sound echoed through the silence. Metal clanged, and a fence rattled. Clara grabbed the light and stepped out the door. She heard it again, movement at the edge of the trees, and then a sharp whinny. Salas. She ran barefoot through the mud toward the paddock. What she saw made her stop cold. A man, the same one from the black truck, was inside the fence, and Salas was standing between him and the gate. The man held a rope. Get out of the way, horse. Salas didn't move, didn't blink. The man took a step forward. Salas reared back, his hooves striking the air, his body rising like a flame into the night. The man froze. Salas landed hard, dust and frost flying. He stepped forward, teeth bared, shoulders squared. The man backed away, another rear, higher. This time, the rope dropped. The man turned and ran, scrambling over the gate, and went into the dark. Clara rushed into the paddock, breathless. Salas turned slowly. He looked at her, calm and steady, like it had been nothing. She ran to him and wrapped her arms around his neck, tears freezing on her cheeks. You didn't just protect me. She pulled back to meet his eyes. You chose me. And for the first time, Salas nuzzled her cheek. The video only lasted 37 seconds. Clara almost didn't post it. She wasn't the type to broadcast her life online. But something in her heart said, people need to see this. It showed Salas standing tall under a gray sky, his dark copper coat gleaming with a hint of drizzle, his black mane tangled by the wind. The camera was shaky, filming on her phone from inside the paddock. In the video, Clara gave no commands, no halter, and no rope. She simply walked to the center, and Salas, without hesitation, approached, circled, and bowed, then positioned himself perfectly by her side. The caption read, "This horse was sold as aggressive, discarded, and marked as dead in government records, but he's alive. He's kind, and he remembers everything." Mustang survivor Salas Solis, the horse. She went to sleep thinking it would disappear into the void. By morning, it had 2.1 million views. Her phone lit up with hundreds of messages, some from horse lovers, some from trainers, and some from veterans. But what struck her were the ones from former Mustang handlers, people who had worked with horses like Salas in therapy, in prisons, and ranch programs across the country. One message read, "He looks like Ranger. Ranger disappeared from our program 2 years ago. Same build, same eyes." Another, "I swear I trained that boy into a cult just like him. His name was Dust Devil. I thought he was put down after a transport incident." Clara sat at the kitchen table in silence. Salas wasn't just a survivor. He was a ghost of a system that failed and came back to prove it. By noon, a local journalist knocked on her front door. "I saw the video," she said. "May I see the horse?" Clara hesitated. "He doesn't do tricks. He's just who he is. That's all anyone wants to see." Clara agreed under one condition. Salas wouldn't be treated like a spectacle. The reporter, to her credit, kept her distance. Salas stood at the far end of the paddock when Clara called him. "Salas," she said softly, "it's all right. You can come." He looked up, watched her for a second, and then walked slowly and deliberately until he stood at her side. The reporter said nothing. She only cried. The story ran that evening with the headline, "He was supposed to be dead. Now he's teaching us all what survival means." By the next day, Clara had offers. A national sanctuary wanted to feature him in a memorial for lost Mustangs. A therapy center for veterans asked if Salas could visit. A documentary crew requested access. She declined most of them, not because Salas wasn't worthy of attention, but because he deserved peace first. That night, Clara sat on the porch, while Salas grazed in the moonlight. She opened a letter that had arrived by mail, handwritten with no return address. Inside was a single line. "They tried to silence him, but thank you for giving him back his voice." No name, just those words. She looked up. Salas had raised his head. He stood still, looking toward her like he'd been listening the whole time. "Do you remember them?" she asked. Salas blinked slowly. "I don't know where you came from or how you made it back," she said, standing and stepping barefoot into the field. "But I know you're not here by accident." He walked to her, his steps soft and sure. When he reached her, Clara leaned her head against his neck and whispered, "You're not just a rescue. You're a message." It had been for weeks since Clara brought Salas home, for weeks since she outbid a kill buyer at an illegal auction, for weeks since she watched a ghost of a Mustang bow his head and rest against her chest, and for weeks since the world decided to listen. Now the ranch was different, not louder, not busier, just known. People didn't come to gawk. They came to feel, to remember, to heal. Some cried, some smiled, and some simply stood near the fence, quiet, waiting for that moment when Salas would walk up to them and just be there. He didn't need to do anything. His presence was enough. Clara walked the pastures at sunrise now, barefoot, coffee in hand, and Salas often followed at her side. No halter, no ropes, no commands, just mutual trust, just choice. And every time she thought the story had reached its end, something new unfolded. Like the time a boy came from out of state with his therapist, a boy who hadn't spoken in months after losing his father in a wildfire. He stood at the edge of the field, frozen. Salas approached without being called. The boy reached out, trembling. Salas leaned into him and gently exhaled softly against his arm. The boy whispered, "He sees me," his first words in 96 days. There were other moments. The veteran who stood at the post, saluting Salas without a word. The elderly woman in a wheelchair who asked to sit in the grass and just hear him breathe. Clara never advertised, she never posted again, but people came anyway, drawn by something they couldn't name. That spring, she built a new paddock wider, open with a view of the river that flowed along the edge of her property. Salas took to it immediately. He'd stand there at dusk, staring into the water like it held memories. Sometimes Clara would sit beside him on the grass, sketchbook in hand, drawing the curve of his back, the flick of his ears, and the tangle of his black mane. And every time, he would eventually nudge her hand, not for food, just to remind her he was still there. One evening, just before sunset, Marlin Finch came by again. He stood by the fence, arms crossed, hat low. "He doesn't act like a horse," he said. Clara smiled. "He doesn't have to." Marlin nodded. "Do we ever find out where he came from?" Clara shook her head. "At this point, I think he's from somewhere else entirely." Marlin looked at her sideways. "Are you going to keep him forever?" Clara didn't even hesitate. "He's already where he chose to stay." But even the strongest stories need a final act, and Salas had one more moment to give. It started with a small fire in the neighboring ridge, nothing unusual for that time of year. Clara was helping her neighbor evacuate to mares when she realized Salas wasn't in the paddock. She ran back, heart racing. He wasn't at the fence, not under the trees, but then she saw him standing in the lower pasture, facing the smoke, ears up, body still. The wind shifted, flames popped in the distance, and Salas didn't move. "Come on," Clara shouted, waving her arms. "We have to go." But he stood firm. She approached with tears in her throat. "Please don't do this." Then she saw it, a foal, barely standing, legs trembling, trapped against the outer fence by the smoke. Salas had seen it first. He was guarding the baby. Clara climbed over the rail and reached the foal. It was breathing hard. Panicked, she picked it up, legs dangling, and turned towards Salas. "Let's go." They ran, smoke swirled, and ash fell, but Salas stayed close, just behind her, ears back, eyes locked on the foal. Together, they got it to safety. By the time they crossed the main field again, the fire had been pushed back, the wind had shifted, and Clara collapsed to her knees beside Salas, holding the foal against her chest. "You knew," she whispered. "You always know." He lowered his head and rested it against hers. A week later, the foal's owners came to claim him, but before they left, the boy, maybe 12 years old, hugged Salas's neck and whispered something no one could hear. Salas closed his eyes and stayed still the whole time. And then came the day Clara had been quietly preparing for deep in her heart. Salas's breathing slowed, and his steps became heavier. He still walked beside her every day, but slower, more thoughtful. The fire inside him had burned hot and long, but never in pain, just with purpose. And one morning, Clara opened the front door, expecting to see him waiting by the gate. But he wasn't there. She searched the paddocks, the fields, and the trees until she found him lying in the tall grass near the river, still, peaceful, like he'd chosen the place himself. She knelt beside him, laid her hand over his heart, and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Later that week, Clara buried him beneath the tree where he used to stand at sunset. She carved a post and placed it in the ground. Salas, they tried to erase him, but he became unforgettable. If this story touched your heart, let Salas's memory live on. Like, comment, and share, because sometimes the souls the world throws away are the ones who come back to save us all. Subscribe for more true stories of courage and connection. Tag someone who believes in second chances. And remember, not all heroes speak. Some just stand beside them.